Welcome back to a Celtic State of Mind, a positive state of mind. I'm Paul John Dykes and I'm joined today by John Paul Mason. You wouldn't think we're going for a treble, dear me. John Paul, I'm going to start off with that jersey over your shoulder. Listen, see when I was going through all the old shirts and that, there were some that I looked at and I thought, at the time when it came out, I wasn't a big fan. And that's one of them, which I think has improved with time. I look at it now and I'm like, oh, that's a bit of a classic. But see, at the time, I wasn't too fussed for it. I'm not quite sure why. But looking at it now, I think it's a fantastic jersey.
See, as I laid it out to put the hanger in it, I was like, that's a really good top.
It is. It really is.
It goes under the radar. I like the kind of, see the gold stripes. They're simple in their style, to coin a line. But it's just, and I think New Balance is probably going to get a little bit of kind of retrospective love. By the way, I love the Adidas kits. I know not everyone's been a huge fan of their output, but I mean, I always wanted an Adidas Celtic kit when I was wee, and I'm not going to grumble now. We've had many, but the New Balance kits, I think they'll stand the test of time.
Well, I look at that one, also look at several others, and I think it's maybe because they weren't worn all that regularly. I mean, I look at that jersey, I just think Lee Griffiths. But the seasons that we didn't win 10 in a row, we might come back to that subject of 10 in a row again at some point. The jerseys were brilliant, but they're never ever kind of thought of as being great jerseys. The three Adidas jerseys, the lime green one in particular, stunning. But it was a horrible season.
You'll notice that that's not been up at any point. No, I've obviously got it, and maybe if we ever do 10, maybe those shirts will be exercised. And
you're right.
Free from the shackles of being at the bottom of your drawer.
Until then, there's a trigger warning if they're going to appear. Right. Is that Superman 4, by the way? Is that a soundtrack?
It's Superman 3. And,
man.
I'm glad you brought it up, and folk will probably go off their nut that we're not talking about Celtic, but Gene Hackman passed away today, and he was like
I hadn't heard.
95.
Fair innings.
Indeed, but like I absolutely love the Superman. I mean, I tend to be obsessed about things when I'm into them. Hence, here we are. I've been on a podcast with Celtic for 5 years. No, I loved the Superman films when I was wee. Still do. Gene Hackman, a massive part of that, and obviously beyond Superman, he was in the Royal Tenenbaums. What else? French Connection. There's so much. And he was also in Mississippi Burning, which my Uncle Tony told me in the last year or two. He was like, I've seen Mississippi Burning. You need to watch that. What a film, what a film. And obviously he was right. It's an incredible film. I watched it for the first time in like last year, I think, and I'd never seen it. It's 35 years old or something. So
there's nothing quite like a recommendation from someone you trust about music or film. And anyway, we could talk about music all day. Shaq,
I know, but Gene Hackman wasn't in Superman 3, just for any of the purists out there, but it was a tip of the cap to the Superman, the original Superman films with Christopher Reeve.
The original and the best. Gene Hackman was one of the faces just seen popping up all the time when you were younger. He was like omnipresent in films. Loads to talk about, JP, and as I say, I'm feeling really positive about Celtic right now. We're going to be talking about our performance and result against Aberdeen the other night, looking ahead to the weekend, and where we are really in relation to heading for a treble. Without complacency, by the way, I've got to say that, because Hibs have just beaten us. You might want to give us your take on that as well, JP. You've not been on since then. Heading for a treble, looking towards next season, looking at some of the players that, might have been written off by some, like Arnie Engels, who has really come into the fore. A wee look at the youth development side of things. I've got a wee update on that, and everything else Celtic related. So we'll start off. 2 games since you were last on, JP. You had the disappointment of the weekend, the VAR controversy. How often have we said that? And then on Tuesday night, we absolutely trounced Aberdeen, a team who have caused us problems this season. I didn't say it was a bad performance. I think that we weren't at our best, but we didn't have to be. We were clinical enough offensively, and I think we dealt with what Aberdeen chucked at us. So you know, if you're not your best and you win 5-1, take it all day long, JP. How often have you watched a great performance and you've not got the result? So I'm happy with that.
No, absolutely. But it was similar to the Hibs game when we won 3-0. They had a lot of chances in that game and could quite easily have taken the lead or, you know, claimed that they deserved a point or whatever, but they didn't take their chances. Aberdeen didn't take their chances. And they were good ones as well. I mean, they'll probably be having nightmares about those opportunities that they had to take the lead. But that's what football is. You take your chances, and like, I mean, they were sort of slightly critiquing Jota's finish, and it's just like, who cares? Like so he slightly mishit it. It doesn't matter. It went in the back of the net.
Remember Tommy Johnston against St Mirren? Was anyone complaining?
Or was that when he just stopped and went like that?
I just scuffed it. He totally scuffed it. I mean, I also remember Cascarino, Big Tony. He got his first goal against the Jambos, and he scored it with studs, JP. It was just a scut. Who cares how they go in?
No, absolutely. I mean, if you can't be grumbling about scoring goals against a team when you're just, that's the name of the game. I understand that Jota's output has been more of the spectacular, but ultimately it finished off a really good move. And I don't think he's going to go into the dressing room and get chastised by Brendan Rodgers for not putting a bit more finesse in the finish. Like, in fact, it didn't go into the top bin or anything like that. So, I think the Hibs game, just to go back to that, and the whole furore over the goal, it wasn't. It's amazing how vehement people can be online about something being right or wrong when they've got absolutely no concrete evidence to prove it. Like, I mean, yeah, I've mentioned them before. My mate Matty does a Hibs podcast called Long Bangers, and by and large they're fairly sensible, but they went off on one at the weekend, like proper, slagging Brendan Rodgers, memes of Brendan Rodgers, like constant posts, and then sort of saying, I've had so many Celtic fans in the replies that they're just getting blocked, or they'll be sent this picture of Brendan Rodgers with kind of stern face to the interviewer after the game. And fair enough, it generates banter and everything else, but you know that at the root of that they actually believe that, they're in the right and Celtic are in the wrong for questioning it. I will be interested when the VAR review show comes along, whenever that is. I mean, it's not as if you're waiting for the next episode a sort of Netflix show or something like that.
PK Blinders.
You don't know when that's going to happen. It just seems to happen, and then suddenly there's online discourse about it. The Willie Collum, Gordon Duncan, because there's absolutely no way that they're not going to discuss.
It's got to be discussed. Is he taking a task though, JP? I mean, listen, but we now live in a world where, and I'm watching it all the time because it's part of the media landscape, if you want to call it that. And I've said this a million times because I truly believe it. I don't think it matters where the media comes from, be that a mainstream source or an alternative source. If it's good, it's good. And that's the way it's all going to level out. If something's good, it will survive. If it's not, it won't. So when I watch these things, what I often find, the big shows online are quite reluctant to challenge whoever's on the show. And is that the same with Colum? I mean, is it just like Colum's word is gospel and that's the end of it? Because the reason I bring that up, right, he might come out and say, right, imagine we were to back all the people who have been complaining about this. This is going to cause us major issues. There's already calls for Muir not to be involved in Celtic games by some, etc., etc. The club are questioning it. The club are demanding footage and audio. If he was to go down the line and saying, actually, he's right, that was a bad decision, what he needs to do is show us why, and he needs to show us it. Because I honestly don't think they have got the images to prove, like you say, with evidence to say this is why the decision's correct. That's the issue I've got with it.
And that's ultimately usually it's not evidence based. It's kind of rules based in terms of what he picks up on, in terms of if it's should have been a penalty, or it should have, these are the laws that we want applied and all the rest of it. But this is it's either right or it's wrong. It's not opinion. You can't then go, because you know what it's like in tennis when you see the ball like land and they show you that kind of bounce
so conclusive.
I know. And it's shaved the line, therefore it's in. So and I know this is like semantics, and it almost feels like you're forensically analysing one incident in a game, and then obviously your run-of-the-mill Hibs fan will just be like, "Oh, dry your eyes, you're top of the league by 30. It doesn't matter."
You always get the run of the green. I've heard that so many times as well.
Yeah, and it's just kind of like, well, I don't have a problem with Hibs playing well against us and taking 3 points, but I do have a problem with us potentially scoring a legitimate goal to equalise when we've got momentum, the wind in our sails. And as Brendan Rodgers said, and as many people I've spoken to who were at the game were like, well, I could have saw us going on and getting a winner in that game had we got that equaliser at the time that we did. And that galvanised Hibs and kind of probably deflated us a little bit, because we were like, that was the moment that we needed to score that goal. We scored it, and then we're told it's not a goal, despite the on-field decision being a goal. But yeah, I guess you just sort of suck it up and move on, much the same as we sucked up the Iwata penalty last season at Tynecastle, which was never a penalty, and much the same as we sucked up the Yang red card, which still mystifies me as to I think it was Kev mentioned yesterday that the momentum, it was James, the momentum that Yang's got was stopped by kicking a Hearts player in the face. I don't really think that's what happened.
No,
that's not my memory of it.
That didn't happen. Yeah, this is my issue. We've obviously gone on about it, JP, right? But you're right. It's not because we feel entitled to win every single game. Therefore, we're looking for excuses. Not that at all. Celtic were rubbish in the first half against us. Absolutely, way off it. But you're right. The momentum at that moment, if you get that second goal, I truly believe the momentum's in our favour, and we go on and win it. And it almost like blew the wind out your sails at that point. But if Willie Collum comes out and says, right, okay, the rule is this, and Alan Muir's seen that, therefore that was Alan Muir's interpretation of the incident, that's not good enough. Because the interpretation is not good enough when you're talking about VAR. VAR is video assistant referee. It's meant to should be showing you the Wimbledon, like you say, the tennis, the ball is out, and we're not seeing it.
Which has been in tennis for how long? I can remember seeing that when I was a wee guy. So clearly,
it's like Pong. It's like ZX Spectrum style. It's always been there.
It pretty much has. So the fact that in 2025, when we've got so much other developments in technology, that football seems to be like, oh no, that's far too expensive. Like, we can't have that. And surely it's just a case of like having a camera at each corner flag that runs right along the line. And I mean, I don't know, I'm no expert, but I can't understand how a sport like tennis has had that technology in place for so long, like way back into, like you say, Don Amiga days and stuff.
The thing is, we're in a world here, right, where, and we'll get to this, based on how it affects Celtic, where there is apparently major investment coming into Scottish football. And there's been investment in Aberdeen, there's been investment in Hibs and Hearts, and Celtic are obviously so well run that we have got a really good financial footing. So there's a lot to look at Scottish football and say, you know what? They're probably punching above their weight when you look at attendances, for example, JP, or you look at Celtic's performance in the Champions League, because we're earning our own money. We're not getting thrown billions of pounds from a broadcasting deal. We're not getting thrown millions of pounds from sponsorship for leagues and Scottish Cups and League Cups. You can win a treble, and if you were to look at your prize money, and it's not about prize money, but if you were to look at that, you're thinking a couple of wins in the Champions League exceeds what you win for winning a treble. It's absurd. But there's a lot of good in Scottish football. Why do we keep shooting ourselves in the foot with things like this that actually, right, you budget for it and you make sure we've got the best system? I mean, you could do away with linesmen with technology. You could have a camera, right? You could have something in the ball that doesn't weigh it down, and you could have a camera that just basically follows them up and down. It's offside or it's not. It's simple. The technology's there. The VAR that we've seen in Champions League, for example, where your toenail's offside, frustrating as it is, at least it shows you the evidence. And that's the big thing for me. It's just tin pot. It absolutely is tin pot.
As you say, can you imagine that exact same incident happens with Johnston putting a ball in, and it's against Bayern Munich for a second goal in the Allianz Arena? Imagine that happens. But we're supposed to be like, he thought it was out. It's like, well, show us that it was out, because this is us getting into the net. Football matches are the same principles no matter what level. So this is us potentially getting into the next round, the last 16 of the Champions League, and you're willing to just go on the eye of a linesman who cannot possibly decide that was not completely over the line. I understand that it was very, very borderline, and it could be either way. And if the evidence was presented to me during this show or after the show, and it was to say that it was out, I'd be like, okay, fine, that's fine. They got it right. Lucky him. If it was wrong, and it was like slightly on the line, as per the Gary Neville video that's done the rounds, then we've got a problem, haven't we?
We do. I'm going to bring this up, by the way. Gary Doonan. I've spoken to Gary quite a few times. Knows his stuff, knows his chops, as they say, Gary. And I think I know the answer to this already, JP, right? And we're talking about the guy that sits near you at Celtic Park. Does that guy that JP knew still think Maeda is a fraud?
Oh, man, I love that he remembers that. I'd actually forgotten that.
Remember that? Oh,
yeah,
man.
I think it was it was a Champions League game, and I think it might have been Slovan Bratislava, I think it might have been that game. It could have been, it was definitely a European game within the last, year and a half or so, because it was quite fresh. Now that I've been reminded of it, it's fresh in my memory. But I mean, that guy was just like that. And then there was comments saying he's back, Maeda's back to looking like a competition winner. That was recent. That was recently. Like that goal he scores against Aberdeen when he watches the fight of the ball and then volleys it in. Like that's just like nobody else in that pitch is doing that. Absolutely no chance is anybody else doing that, because they've not got the speed of thought, the actual speed of legs for one to get into that position. The Aberdeen players, the keeper couldn't do anything. Like there's no way a keeper saving that shot. A volley from 5 yards, 6 yards, if that. So I mean, the argument over if anybody's still in the anti-Maeda train, then they better get off it, because there's now rumbling of, like, obviously Brendan Rodgers was asked if he reckoned they'd be interested in him in the summer, and you can't possibly think of a world where there aren't clubs looking at him and being like, we'll take it. Because as I said to you at the time, I was worried that Ange Postecoglou was going to come back and get him, and that's now over a year and a half ago, that I was concerned about that being the one guy that he goes, well, I'll just come in and pay 10 million or something for Maeda, and then have him up my sleeve should I need him in a game down in the Premier League, because I would have thought that he could have needed him, especially in the last 6 months to a year where he's had an absolute nightmare with injuries and everything else. Maeda is rarely injured. When can you ever recall Maeda being out for a length of time? It's not that much.
It's unusual. You're spot on. The other day, I actually said this, JP, you know how you compare, it's just something you do as a football fan, you compare players to other players. They remind you, it could be their style, it could be their gait, whatever it is, but they remind you of other players, certain things that they do. I cannot think of another Celtic player that I can compare to Maeda. I think he's unique. I really do. Honestly, I'm racking my brains, because I do think there's elements of Kuhn's game that remind me of Paddy Roberts, for example, right? But when I look at Jota, we've had so many flair wingers that can come inside and do that, and the tricks and all this kind of stuff. But Maeda, no, I just cannot think of a player quite like him. He is unique. He's a pocket dynamo, and there's going to be interest. Absolutely, there's going to be interest.
I just hope we bat it back, because I think, I don't know who it was saying it, but they were saying that maybe that it is the right time for Hatate to move on, because he's maybe ran his race at Celtic, and that's all very well and good. I probably subscribe to that feeling as well. I don't think it's the same for Maeda. I think Maeda being intrinsic in a Brendan Rodgers season 3 team, after hopefully a bit more spending this coming summer to really bolster what we did last summer, and in January by bringing Jota back. You can't forget that. And Schlupp. I just would really, really like to see Maeda with, absolute quality completely all around about him. No drops or anything. Just a really, really strong forward line that he's included in, and midfield as well. I mean, who would not want to see Dyson Maeda and Kieran Tierney play on the left together? Do you know?
Oh my word! I know. And the thing is, with the left hand side, they were getting a bit of stick yesterday, and that's fine, because we can disagree with each other. even if we were not on the same show. And I do think that the left-hand side wasn't as weak as was discussed yesterday. I didn't think Sloop had a bad game. I think I've been really impressed with Sloop since he came in.
I think he's been impressed with Celtic as well.
Yeah, you're right, JP. I think it was one of the ones where I don't like to think we need to convince certain players to come to Celtic, right? But we take it for granted what we have to offer. There's a lot of people down there who, they're just wondering about making big money in English football, playing 300 games in the top division in English football. He's at 32. Why would he come up to Scotland? It's freezing. So many people have said stuff like that, right? And he comes up, and I think he's probably been taken aback by, the crowds, the passion, the atmosphere. But I've been watching him. I just think he's so quick at getting across that park. Almost like, remember back in the day, for any of you young pups in the comment section, there was a position called sweeper. Nobody plays it now. And it was just like a player that could almost like just gauge and read the game and mop up behind it. And he does
Neil
that
Lennon.
so well.
Neil Lennon.
He was like a midfield sweeper, wasn't he?
It was Neil Lennon was unbelievable. I see whenever I speak to folk younger that didn't get the chance to see Lennon play or whatever, I'll always bang the drum on how good Neil Lennon was for Celtic. I'd be astonished if anybody came into the comments to disagree. They may well do, but my memory of Neil Lennon as a Celtic player was that of someone who was quite often should have been the man of the match, but the plaudits and the headlines were taken by a certain Swedish striker, and rightly so most of the time. But Neil Lennon was putting in man of the match performances for Celtic week in, week out, immense. And he did exactly that thing where he would just follow the play and run into where someone was, and invariably he'd come away with the ball, almost sometimes without even seeming to tackle them. It was just like he timed his run alongside them just to nick it, and then pass it to a forward-thinking player. I know he was never that guy that would sort of maraud into the box, although it did happen at Ibrox and we didn't get a penalty for it, if you remember that.
I do remember it.
Stonewall penalty every day of the week.
Who took him down?
Couldn't tell you.
Was it Barry Ferguson?
Well,
the Alloa legend, Barry Ferguson. It might have been. There's something in here, by the way, Barryman. I'm going to bring this up because we love our jerseys, and there's going to be, I think, a new Celtic jersey next month. JP, it's going to be that one that we don't wear, and then obviously in the summer there'll be another whole. And we say home away and third jersey. You go in with a wee fella to the Celtic shop. There's then 3 different goalie tops to choose from as well, and then. There's a really cool one in the shop at the minute. I can't remember what it was. It was one of the campaigns that Adidas ran. Love Unites it is, and it's quite psychedelic. That's cool as well. But there's so many jerseys going out now. What did you expect? Well, Barryman, I am maybe a pervert when it comes to jerseys. Don't clip that. I was going to say aficionado, but that would have been sounding a bit arrogant. I'm not an aficionado. I love my Celtic and football jerseys. And there's quite a lot, actually, of Adidas templates that I think Celtic could have nabbed from. And, if Adidas were to think about it, they could probably make an absolute killing by bringing out things like this top, which is an absolute belter of a jersey. Imagine that with a Celtic badge on it. Wow. I would have that next month, no problem. There's other ones as well. Let's have a look. There's a few others that I think are just easy wins if you bring them in, JP. So I always remember this. I love this top, and I think of Jan Molby every time I see it. But that's another belter. Give us that, Adidas.
That's the Adidas Celtic tops. That's exactly one of the. I have a drawing of from probably about 1989, 1990, I have a hand drawing that I drew of a Celtic top that is basically that, because I've still got it in a scrapbook somewhere.
By the way, JP, it is a winning template. I would love to see that. I absolutely would love it. And I love the fact that you didn't design a hooped Adidas jersey as well. Way back, there was some kind of forbearing when you were doing that. So,
yeah, because I posted it and then someone photoshopped it onto Lee Griffiths, actually fitted it to him. That's funny.
I love that. And the other one, of course, it wouldn't be a discussion about Adidas without a picture of David Ginola. Give us that in green and white hoops.
That was a cracking top. That really was a cracking top. And to think he could have worn the hoops themselves.
Oh, I know. That comes up from time to time. I don't think I'm over it yet, to be honest. Let's bring in some of the comments before we get stuck into the Aberdeen performance. Jungle Lion, always great to hear from you. Noise, 5 minutes of fame. I'm going to give you my take on all the chat around Scottish football at the moment and how it might affect Celtic positively. The Urban Culture, good day, JL and fellow Acsom addicts. You're talking to Jungle Lion here. Let the crabbitness commence. It's a crabbit-free zone today, JP. A crabbit-free zone. I've got to say, actually, I don't know if you've had time, you're a busy man, but last Friday we spoke to friends of yours. We spoke to Tony Costello of Tijuana Bibles.
I've watched it up to him talking about a guy that owned the club or something getting out of the car with like two models, and
that was a movie scene. That was just a movie scene for one of the bizarre films.
I wish it had been filmed. Like that would have been amazing if that whole thing had been filmed. Like their tour of wherever they were Eastern Europe or something. They ended up in
Estonia.
Lithuania. In Estonia. Aye, brilliant.
It's brilliant, eh?
Because I haven't ever been to really that part of the world, those parts of the world. Been to Poland, but haven't been to anywhere sort of further than that. And I would imagine the further you go, the more mental it gets. So
yeah, Estonian nightclubs. There you go. There's a documentary in that somewhere. And obviously the intro, we gave you a shout out because if my diary and my organisation was better, you'd have been in on that show. It was you that introduced me to the band, and he did. He gave you a wee name drop for the fact that Superman 3 record one week was a Tijuana Bibles record.
He sent me a message saying he really enjoyed it. So
it was brilliant. And I've got the album there, which is great. Brendan McCarthy says, Yang scores against the staunch Avengers and everyone will be in the Yang gang. Right. Let's have a wee chat about Yang then, because I've never called him a fraud, as the person did at Celtic Park, but I've never really thought that he quite meets that level, right? And the big thing for me, Palma, who scored last night for Olympiacos.
He's back heel?
He's...
back heel was outrageous. By the way, that's exactly what we've said before about players that may not just fit or do well at Celtic, that they can go somewhere and find their level. And Olympiacos isn't a bad level for Lewis Palmer. Pretty decent. And that might be where he gets his confidence back and then looks to seal a permanent move and things work out for him in his career, and he'll not have had the worst time at Celtic, but maybe just not the best time. It's just how it works sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, see, when you talk to players, I'm trying to remember who it was. It was Bobby Petter, actually. We were speaking to Bobby Petter, and he says he hates when people just get written off as flops and all this kind of stuff. He said, because to get to the point where Celtic have scouted and signed you, you have got attributes. I mean, let's use Dirk Borigta, for example, right? Anybody in the comments who thinks that he was a good player for Celtic is insane, right? He was absolutely rotten, but he wasn't a rotten footballer. I mean, he had the attributes to play for Ajax. You know, he was a high level footballer. Comes to Celtic and it doesn't work out. Timu Pukki comes to Celtic and, you know, didn't look the part, went away and continued to score goals everywhere except at Celtic. So when you look at Palma and you look at his technical ability, you think, absolutely, he'll go away somewhere and be a star player somewhere, JP. But I had similar concerns about Yang, but in a different way. It wasn't about attitude or application. I wasn't sure he had that bit of magic that he needed to take on a man, to create a chance, to get an assist, to score a goal. And in probably the last 5 or 6 weeks, he started doing all that. So the first thing I would say is kudos to Brendan Rodgers for persevering with him. And I'm just going to ask you the question, are you yet in the Yang gang or are you still on the fence?
I'm in the gang to say that I'm really pleased with his progress. However, I stand by what I've said many times before. Yang's never going to be a guy that if we sell, say we sold, oh God forbid we sold Maeda, that Yang's going to suddenly become a first team player for Celtic. I just don't see that. I mean, I think the guy's obviously got talent. There's no way he wouldn't be at Celtic if he wasn't, but we've just not seen enough over the time. And as somebody said, I think yesterday, you saw what Nicholas Kuhn did after a difficult first 6 months. He then just kicked into gear, and we've seen an unbelievable return in performances from Kuhn this season, which has led to him being in the conversation for Player of the Year. Although I think he might be ousted now by his fellow winger on the other side. But Yang is just like this kind of almost enigma of a player that you know that he's capable of doing something, but then you also know that he's capable of poor play as well. And if he can eradicate that from his game, then he may be kept around in the summer to be a squad player. But I just don't see him ever being a first team player. And it's all about what you look at. Scott Bain. Scott Bain's been happy to be a guy that doesn't even kick a ball for Celtic, and that would Yang be happy to be that guy, knowing that he's not ever going to be a number one choice on either wing at whatever age he is, 20, 23, is he? 22, 23?
I'm going to have a look at that actually, because I'm going to say 22. I think when we signed him, he was 21. So I will have a look at that, because the Bainzo thing's so strange, isn't it? And 22. Because, goalkeepers can sometimes do it. I remember we had Zaluska who kind of did that. He just, warmed the bench. Goalies get away with that. I mean, Bainzo's going on for 300 unused substitute appearances. I'm looking forward to him getting the jersey before the game in a frame. 300 Bainzo testimonial. But the thing is, what do you do if you're Scott Bain on a match day? What do you do, JP? Because you're not playing for the B team. Sinisalo's on the bench for certain. Are you part of the squad? Do you just stay in the dressing room listening? And I mean, what do you do? I mean, that must be a strange existence for a footballer.
I mean, being honest, I would find it hard to leave Celtic as well. And I know that's probably unique to anybody that's a Celtic supporter. Even the opportunity to pull on the Celtic tracksuit to go on a European trip or something like that, and that's all you maybe really do. Obviously, you're training and everything else, but I don't think that buzz would leave me if I was involved. And I don't know what his allegiances are football club wise prior to joining Celtic. I don't know what he was when he was younger. He's from Edinburgh, I think. He grew up in sort of Dalkeith, Pennycook.
Dalkeith.
That kind of.
I think you're right, actually. I think you're right.
So I don't know if he's a Hibby or Hearts or what, but I wouldn't ever, criticise him for being there and not moving on. If there's an agreement in place with Celtic that they're happy to pay him whatever they pay him, and he's happy to be paid whatever he's paid to not play football, essentially, then I guess if that's what you want to do with your career, and then he'll retire a rich enough guy and won't have played as much football as somebody else his age, But more back to Yang, it's up. It would depend on conversations between him and Brendan Rodgers, honest conversations about where he's, because we kept getting linked with wingers, as James pointed out yesterday. We kept getting linked with wingers even after Jota was in door. The guy from Royal Antwerp, Balak, I can never say his name. That's so bad. Balak, yeah, there you go.
Middle name Ange. I always remember
that. The Norwegian guy as well, who Brendan Rodgers couldn't pronounce his name. So there's clearly interest in strengthening the wing position, which then you immediately turn to Yang and go, well, where do you fit in this? If you're spending potentially 7 million upwards on another winger, because that definitely pushes him down. I don't know. Would he benefit from going on a loan and then coming back and seeing how things are then? Possibly. But I would have thought that time has come and gone for him.
Yeah. There's a couple of things about it. I mean, obviously, we always go on about the success of bringing in our Japanese players, even though only half of them were really successful. Kobayashi, Iwata and Ideguchi were not. We brought in 3 South Korean players. And I don't think any of them could be classed as a outright success. All scored a few goals. I wouldn't say he was a hit though. He never started many games, and we sold him on for a kind of quick profit. Kwon, and I'm not trying to be nasty, will never be a Celtic player. Kwon will never be a Celtic player. And he's gone out on loan to St Mirren and Hibs. And if you don't go to these teams and absolutely shine, what makes you think they're coming back to Celtic to do that? So I can't see him continuing with the football club. So out of 3, Yang's probably got a shout alongside O as being the best of the 3. But if he was to go out on loan, I mean, where's he going? If he was to go to Aberdeen, for example, JP, or Hibs or St Mirren, and you look at that, if we were able to get our money back in the summer, I would take it. I would take it. 2.5 million. I would happily take it back. But that is on the proviso that someone else is coming in, because obviously James A. Forrest, he got an injury maybe in his younger years. The injury would have been, half the time it's taken for him to come back. So he's getting to that stage of his career that he's not always going to be available. I do think we need to strengthen in there. Some great comments coming in. We are going to be talking, of course, about Tuesday night against Aberdeen. We're going to be looking ahead to St Mirren, which is a Saturday night kick-off, 5:30. And we'll also be looking at a few other wee bits and bobs around Scottish football and how it affects Celtic. But I want to touch also on the youth development as well. I was talking yesterday, JP, I was talking yesterday to someone who, when there's a narrative around youth development at Celtic, and here's the narrative, right? Tell me if you agree or disagree. Gary Doonan knows a lot more than I do about youth football in Scotland, as do quite a few people that I talk to, and that's why I talk to them. JP, I'm not saying this is coming for Gary, but I talk to people who are involved because they know a lot more than I do about the inner workings of youth development. And I'm talking here about players like Ben Doak, Daniel Kelly, Rocco Vata, and the next in line, Daniel Cummings. What's the narrative? Well, I would say to you that the narrative we've kind of been sold is that they're all full of themselves. They've all had their heads turned by agents and they're all chasing the quick buck down south. That's a narrative. Would you agree with that?
It is, but I would agree with that is what maybe a lot of people think. But yeah. I have heard things through people that I've spoken to that have sat next to me at games randomly, and also just folk that I know that know people that work for Celtic or whatever, and I've heard that that's not the case.
Yeah,
well, certainly in Cummings' case, I was led to believe that he was kind of level-headed. He's not a flash guy driving around in a Hummer with a 15 grand watch and all that sort of stuff before he's even really kicked the ball. Because a lot of the time that is the impression you can maybe get of a youngster, that they've just bought into the idea that they're a Celtic player. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget that quote from Brendan Rodgers where he said, you work for Celtic, you're a Celtic player when you're in the first team.
Yeah.
So prior to that point, he says, I see them all and they all smell nice and they look good and they've got their wash bags and all that. It's like, well, what belt have you got on the day? But there's a difference.
I know.
He's done enough in the game to be able to arrive at the game at halftime at St Roch's dressed head to toe in probably about 10 grand's worth of clothes or whatever it was. But I think there's a different argument.
He wasn't quite dressed as an Estonian nightclub owner, though.
It wasn't far off. It wasn't far off. He was missing the gold grill that Tony was talking about in the guy's teeth. But I think I definitely heard about Cummins that he's got his head screwed on. Celtic fan, wanted to stay in and fight for a place in the team and to break in, and that seems to not have happened. And whatever conversations have been had with the club, I'm not privy to them, but it seems that it's not gone the way that he wanted it to. But then also you've heard Brendan Rodgers' comments in pressers where he's sort of saying, with quite a lot of conviction, if you're good enough, you will get in. Like, it's not a case of we are volleying players down south out the door that are like superstars or are almost certain superstars. The Ben Doak one, that's a strange one. I would have thought Ben Doak would have definitely found a way into that Celtic team and possibly saved us a lot of money and having to buy maybe Jota back. I don't know.
You look at the figures we're talking about with a permanent move away from Liverpool with Ben Doak. The reason I bring it up, JP, is it's all narratives, right? And this is a buzzword on Acsom, but it's narratives that are put out there. And I don't blame the first team manager for not having an absolute handle on every young player that's at the football club, because they couldn't possibly do that. This isn't like back in the day, JP, where Jockstein probably knew about every single player at the football club, right down to the third team, which we did have for a spell. It's not like that. I mean, I remember Karamoko Dembele getting his debut, and Brendan Rodgers didn't know he was making his debut and was unhappy that he'd made his debut at the age of 13 for the second string. So there's no way you can have a handle on that. So what you're trusting and what you're hoping for is that the people in those positions are the ones that are feeding you the correct information. So having spoken to a number of different sources in relation to the 4 players that I've mentioned there in terms of Doak, Kelly, Vata and now Cummings, the narrative doesn't really ring true. It's not about the player chasing the dollar and getting their heads turned by the agent. And by the way, I think that has happened in the past. In the near past, I think it has happened with young players at Celtic. But from what I have discussed with those 4 players, that wasn't really the case. And the one thing that I think is quite concerning, and this is not a negative, this isn't, things are going so well, let's find something to kick Celtic with. I think it's so important that we need to get back to producing footballers for Celtic, not for all these other teams.
Yeah.
And let's say that, Cummins is the next one. And he's obviously good enough, otherwise he wouldn't have played against Aston Villa in the Champions League, JP. I mean, if he's not good enough, he wouldn't have been there, right? Mm-hmm. But he did, and he made his debut. The fact that he'll probably never play for Celtic again is probably very sad to him and his family, who are all Celtic fans. They come from Coatbridge. He's been at Celtic since the age of 5. 13 years at Celtic. 13 years at Celtic, right? So, yeah, the club have invested in him, and he's invested in the club. Now, the thing that concerns me and that people don't actually know is the fact that some of his contemporaries were in a similar contract situation in the summer, right? So you're looking at young guys like Francis Turley. Another one was Colby Donovan. You might remember both of them featured in the pre-season. So both of those players got new deals, and young Cummings didn't. Now, Daniel Cummings is on £900 a week. That's what he's on. So he's playing in the Champions League against Aston Villa. I wonder if anybody else on that park is on £900 a week. I wonder, right? So when it comes up to the 31st of December 2024, I would have expected a player at that stage who has scored a goal a game for the B team and for the youth team, I would have expected Celtic Football Club to have discussed a new deal with him. Because on the 1st of January, he's in his last 6 months, and the vultures that we know will be circling out for our first-team players and our youngsters, we've seen so many youngsters leaving, can start talking to that player on the 1st of January. When do you think it was, JP, that the club spoke to him?
Mid-January or something like that?
27th of January, 2 days before the Aston Villa game.
Wow.
So he's not been spoken to about his contract until almost 4 weeks into a period of time that all these other clubs can come in and offer him far, far more than we're going to offer him.
Is it not the case that of late, since, I don't know if it was since Brexit or since some guidelines have changed, that the radar for English scouts is focusing on Scotland, in order to look where they maybe didn't previously look? So there's even more likelihood, if we've not done our housekeeping properly with regards to players' contracts, then we're even more susceptible to losing them than we were before. Yeah, because there's just the volume of scouts that are going to be clamouring for the signature of one player. In the past, maybe it'd have been 1 or 2, whereas now it's like 8 or 9.
Yep, 100%.
And if you've got more choices as a young guy, then there's going to be more. Unfortunately to say, there's going to be more attraction to those offers, because if there's 8 or 9 clubs coming in for you, then they're all going to be going, oh, well, we'll give you this, or we'll give you that, or we'll give you this house, or you'll get this car, or all of those sort of things. So, and if Celtic aren't doing that, if Celtic aren't even near that table to discuss, or they've left it too late, and as you're saying in this case, then you can't really blame the guy if he doesn't go. But it's how sad would that be for him? Fair enough, you're going and you look at your bank balance after a couple of months. I mean, I've mentioned it before about John McGinn. John McGinn got a massive lump sum put into his account when Villa got promoted, and to the point that must have, when he put his card in at the hole in the wall, must have been like, that can't be right. Am I John Connor in Terminator 2 here, or what's going on?
I remember hearing an interview with Manny, and this is the thing that you think that all these guys are like millionaires, but prior to the reformation of the Stone Roses, that wasn't the case, and he had to sell a scooter to go to a European final. He's a Man United fan. He had to sell a scooter to go to the game. It's not like he could just like draw the money out and go.
Yeah.
And he spoke about, the day after the announcement of the Stone Roses reunion, doing exactly what you just said. I went to it was like £1.7 million in his bank. Unbelievable. But the thing is, right, so we've left it too late. And this is what I'm trying to put across here. It's not like the players holding off in Celtic so that then they get the big package deal. Celtic have not spoken to this fella. And he's looking at his two contemporaries, right? Colby Donovan, Francis Turley. They've been given new deals, 4-year deals, by the way. Had we given Cummings a deal then, we wouldn't be talking about whatever the English clubs have offered them, right? And they've offered them a hell of a lot more than what Celtic have offered them, right? But we spoke to him on the 27th. He plays on the 29th. He's made his debut for Celtic. We think that that's going to be good enough, like we did with Ben Doka. We'll give you a couple of games, Ben, and you'll sign for us. It's too late. It's too late because the other clubs are now interested in now speaking to his representatives. So when you're looking at that, I'm disappointed because he's never going to play for Celtic now. And despite the fact that obviously he's played against Villa, so we must think he's good enough. Brendan Rodgers keeps saying, I know a player, I've been in youth football and I've coached youth players and I know. I actually think that it goes beyond that. I don't think he's been told early enough about some of the guys that he might have at his disposal. Now, 13 years at Celtic, he goes down to a club in England to discuss a new deal because they've approached him and that is his right. And he has got more of an idea of his plan, his progress plan in those 3 days than he's ever had in all his time at Celtic. He's met by the first team manager, something that's not happened at Celtic. Him and his family have not had a discussion with the first team manager. So he's now, as a young player, 18 years of age, from Coatbridge, big Celtic kind of area, he's now getting stick. So on his socials, he's the rat. He's scared to go out to the shops in Coatbridge in case he gets abused because of this narrative. And the narrative's not quite right, JP. So he's going to leave and he's running a long list and people are just like, they're all just chasing the money. It's not quite like that. And it concerns me because we have been built on producing footballers throughout our history. When you look at all the great Celtic sides, we've produced footballers. Look at our captain right now. We've produced Callum McGregor and there's something broken in the system at the moment.
Well, I mean,
we need to get it right.
Well, we know time waits for no man and there will be a day when we're talking about Callum McGregor's last game for Celtic. And at that point, it's then you can't point to currently you can't point to anything else to say, oh well, we've got this and we've got this person, we've got James Forrest, we've got Anthony Ralston. Who else has come in from the youth to really stake a claim?
Well, Welshie looks as though he's going the same way as Mikey Johnston. We introduced Jude Bonner. Always great to see a young guy coming on, getting some minutes. But it's not as if we've got 2 or 3 coming through every year or so, That's
no, and
what happened.
The thing is, we've corrected so much about the infrastructure of the club in terms of our signing policy and everything else, and doing our best to not waste money, because that's what we've spoke about this so many times over the last 5 years, that we hate seeing Celtic just frittering money on poorly scouted players. That seems to be happening a lot less. It certainly does. I mean, you take two summers ago's window as a standalone kind of. I could probably put that down to the crossover in management if you were actually really sort of forensically analysing it, but I think that we've got a lot right elsewhere. Clearly, we're doing well on the pitch in the first team, but the youth thing is that I don't know if this guy Paul Tisdale has come in too late in order to salvage the Daniel Cummings situation. If you're taking one player situation as an example, whether or not that could have been sorted, but it has to be sorted going forward because there will be another Daniel Cummins, and we have to make sure that it's not as if the odds are that we're not going to have any more talented players in that position, and they have to have been spoken to and given some sort of plan, given some sort of. Everybody at that age wants especially now in today's world, everybody at that stage, if you're part of an infrastructure at Celtic like you are, then you kind of want a kind of some sort of roadmap for your future. Because I'm sure as hell when you pay big bucks for a player, there'll have been a roadmap discussion for Jota, for example. Like, there's no
that's
way
it, because we sell them the dream on coming and playing at the church. So there's a path, there's a roadmap. You're right.
Exactly. So you need to sell it to your youth players as well. It shouldn't just be just because they've not cost you anything, but then you should be looking at it that they've cost you money in development. He's been there for 13 years. Fair enough. It's not going to be millions of pounds that we've spent on him, but it's a significant enough outlay that we should be taking better care of players in that point in time in their life where they've got that crossroads decision to make about where they go next. And if we keep failing on that front, then we'll never produce another Callum McGregor, and we'll just become a team that just has no real identity. And I would hate that, because
it's so important to Celtic.
That's currently why a certain other club in Glasgow has had to go back to get a player from a bygone era to come in to try and instill that, because there's nobody on the park like him. So
try to reconnect with the fan base. You're right.
What's the next best thing we can do? We'll get him in and put all his lack of managerial prowess to one side, and just forget about that and just think about the fact that he's, a Ranger.
Staunch.
But I need to tell you something. It's got a little bit off topic, but it's anonymous, so I'm not naming any names. But a friend of mine worked with someone who who played under Barry Ferguson and at a club. And there's two things that he told me. One of which is absolutely, it's just brilliant. Apparently, for a while, after they'd won games, he was buying them drinks to have after the game. So basically, a carry it, and then they got beat in a game, and he made Bob Malcolm pour them all down the shower hole in front of them as punishment.
Oh, JP! Wow, that's tremendous.
And then the other one was he bought them all Under Armour, right? And he'd made this big deal about how he'd bought them all Under Armour, and then he kept it in his car, and they had a really bad training session, and then he didn't give them the Under Armour. He kept it in his car.
Oh, staunch, man. Honestly, JP, the last thing I'm going to say about young Cummings is Celtic there was an offer made to buy the player this in January. There was an offer made to buy the player, and Celtic refused the offer, knowing that he's going to leave at the end of the season on a development fee. So we have refused money for the player. He's going to go to the football club. He's going to leave for the same club at the end of this season. Why are we doing that? Knowing that player's not going to develop at Celtic now. He's not going to be a Celtic player.
What could possibly be the reason for that?
Exactly. I'm putting it out there. You can make your own mind.
Other than absolute kind of
making an example of him. I mean, why would you do it?
That's really odd.
Because he can only now play in the B team. When the same kind of similar thing happened with Daniel Kelly, he was basically dropped. He was dropped from the B team. He was sitting on the bench for the B team. It was like a punishment thing. It's like pouring down the bevy down the shower. It's just ridiculous.
But Brendan Rodgers doesn't strike me as the type of not just manager, but guy that would be all right with that. Would be all right with this happening. Like, he's obviously the face and the focal point of Celtic, really, as a leader of the whole club. I mean, we don't really hear anything from Dermot Desmond ever, really, and that's fine. I'm not really bothered about that. Michael Nicholson just seems to be a guy content to, do the work that's needed and keep his head down, and he's not a showy guy, giving interviews or anything like that. So it's Brendan Rodgers that's the face of it. So I'm pretty sure Brendan Rodgers would be quite uncomfortable about those factors with regards to young players, because ultimately he knows that Celtic's built on bringing through Scottish players whose goal is to play for the Celtic first team. And I'm pretty sure he would want to leave that as part of his legacy as well. But I don't think he'd want to leave Celtic with absolutely no Scottish youth players having at least got a good amount of games under their belt for the first team. So that I think that's what his his mic drop moment would want to be. It would want to be having established Celtic as be out of that initial group stage in the Champions League. Obviously, keep winning titles and trophies, and then also have an influx of youth into the first team. I think he would feel probably he's failed a little bit if he leaves and that's not happened.
The big thing for me as well on that point, JP, it all depends on what Brendan's getting told. I mean, Kieran Tierney wasn't good enough for Celtic, apparently, if you wanted to listen to people at the academy. You know, John Collins spoke about this with him and Ronnie Dyler. They asked for a left back and they were given 2 left backs. And one of them wasn't Kieran Tierney from the academy. So he was the third choice.
I watched that interview with him and Slaney and Cy Ferry, and he was talking about how there was 3 left backs ahead of him,
right,
who were all pretty good, and he thought he had no chance. And then it was just like a confluence of events led to him getting a training session with the first team, and he impressed, and then he got included in a squad, and then he got he got on as a sub and everything else, and then the rest is history. But there was a point in time where he could quite easily have been a Daniel Cummings of that time. Absolutely. In which case we would have missed out on 3 or 4 brilliant seasons with KT, seeing him develop as a player. And well, I don't think we've really ever spoken about that, because I started coming on this podcast in December 2020. Kieran Tierney's long gone by that time, and we've got way more pressing matters to discuss. But I mean, I absolutely loved watching Kieran Tierney come into the team. I watched him come into the team and saw him as a fairly skinny wee guy, but you could just see that he would absolutely run through a brick wall for Celtic, and then that passion and desire started to, instead of it just being passion and desire and skill, that started to balance up, and you saw it balance up to the point that
you've seen it coming together. Yeah,
you're like, this guy's. I mean, if someone comes in for him, it's going to be big money, and lo and behold, it was. And whilst it might not have worked out exactly like he wanted it to at Arsenal, I think you see from the Arsenal fans' responses online how much they love the guy.
They do. They
don't love him because he had his training gear in a Tesco bag. They love him because of what he's done in the park for them. You know. And
the thing is, I want more KT stories coming through the ranks. We need to make sure that happens. There's something broken at the moment. I'm not blaming Brendan Rodgers, by the way. I think it all depends on what he's told. What was Brendan Rodgers told the one minute before he came onto the post-match press conference? I did get the Celtic fans over there chanting about Greg Taylor. What was he told? Because you've got to think about this. The circumstances prior to that press conference after the game aren't that Brendan Rodgers is looking around the stadium, listening to all the chat. He's focused on his team. And just before he goes in there, somebody's briefing him before he goes in. What was he told that day? So it all depends on what Brendan's been fed by the academy, isn't it? And obviously, we've lost another one. He'll be away. Another thing I wanted to mention here, right, is obviously everything that's been going on in Scottish football. But I'm going to bring this up to begin with. Now, that is the top 6, JP, right? And we've only got a couple of minutes, but the reason I'm bringing it up is because, and this, I know this is my point of reference, but for me, that's the top 6 in Scottish football. And I don't just mean in league placings. I mean in terms of the 6 biggest clubs. And how do you gauge that? You gauge that by average attendances. You gauge it by their history, their successes. Exactly. And that's the 6 clubs I always look at. Celtic, Rangers, Aberdeen, Dundee United, Hibs and Hearts. I've always done it. And it's my point of reference. There's people maybe from the 50s and 60s who remember a great Kilmarnock side or a great Dundee side. But this is my point of reference.
Or Dunfermline.
Or Dunfermline, yeah. And I'm looking at the 6 and I'm thinking, right, okay, so there's your top 6. When was the last time those top 6 teams finished in the top 6? All 6 of them finished in the top 6. So I had a look at it last night.
You found out?
2008, 2009.
Wow.
And for anybody who's going to correct me, yes, I know it was a different version of the club currently sitting second. But in terms of these football clubs, right, and their attendances and their history and their successes, 2008-09. Now, that all depends because I think the rest of the clubs, Dundee, Ross County, St Mirren, Motherwell, St Johnstone, etc., all depends on how well they're being run at that moment. And every so often they'll finish third or they'll get a good cup run. But for me, that's your top 6 teams. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because I think every single one of those clubs underneath Celtic, from 2 to 6, are underachieving massively.
Mm-hmm.
They're absolutely underachieving. And I would much rather the other 5 clubs were far, far stronger and giving Celtic much, much more of a challenge. Because you rise to the challenge, JP. You become stronger. You become more efficient. You make sure that young guys that, it's all right, we'll just buy a player to replace that body in the first team squad. You make sure that doesn't happen. And then you're stronger when you play in Europe because you've got a stronger domestic league.
If they had all sort of looked within and reassess their internal scouting and everything else, they could do a lot better with the money they've spent than what they've done. 100%. Like in the same way that we've done better recently with the money we've spent. And folk will go, oh well, it's all right for you. You can go and buy a player for 6 million, but we can also buy a player for 1.5 in Maeda, and we can buy a player for, like Luke McCowan or whatever. Like these players exist at lower prices. But I have to say, I put it on record, fair play to David Gray. I'm absolutely really happy for him that he's turned it around, because he could have been on the managerial scrap heap and maybe ended up in a sports scene studio rather than managing a football club.
Well, there's a few.
Seems to have gone the other way. Seems to have gone the other way recently. But no, I'm genuinely pleased for the guy, because whenever you see somebody, I no real love for Hibs, but whenever you see somebody who's an ex-player who has that kind of iconic status as he has for what he did in that cup final, it's really been a horror. It's like Chris Doolan at Partick Thistle and things like that. You don't want to see guys tarnish their legacy.
Alan Shearer at Newcastle.
Kenny Dalglish at Celtic to a certain extent.
Lou McCarry at Celtic.
Lou McCarry at Celtic, even though he wasn't actually in charge. But I mean, I don't think one season of Kenny Dalglish and John Barnes is going to fade the memories of Kenny Dalglish at Celtic. I mean, anybody of an age that remembers Kenny Dalglish will tell you that he was just unbelievable for Celtic. But to David Gray to go on that run, I mean, I looked last night when they went 1-0 down to Dundee United, and I was like, oh, well, that's that done. And then they come back and win 3-1 at Tannadice, which is impressive, as is their victory against us. So, long may it continue, apart from in the cup against us. I hope we put that to bed in the cup against them. But yeah, I was kind of pleased for him to do well, and to see them in the top 6 above Hearts as well. So the tide's turned a little bit there for the first time in a while.
All the teams need to be in the top 6.
But you've said that numerous times over the years. You've always rhymed off United, Hearts, Hibs, Aberdeen. I've heard you say that many times. Like, they need to be doing better. And like you say, for the first time since you've been doing this podcast, like, when did you start? 2017.
2017,
and it was 8 years before that was the last time that was the top 6. That's wild, really. When you actually,
they need to get their house in order. But as you say, money doesn't always do that. They've spent a lot of money. Hibs have bought 50 players in 5 years. I mean, they've not been very efficient. So I want them all to be stronger, because it benefits Celtic. And I don't mean in terms of commercial deals. I just think we get better. We need to get better to make sure that you come up against a Hibs team at Easter Road or Dundee United at Tannadice and all this kind of thing, and it's a tough game. You've got to be at the top of your game, and you improve. That's my take on it, JP. Loads more to talk about, but the big klaxon has sounded. It's 1 minute and 3
You should definitely remind people about Johan Mjällby at Gracie's tonight.
Yes.
But if you aren't of that... well, you should be of that persuasion if you're a Celtic fan, but I'm working a gig at Tuts, and the band that are playing tonight are very good. They're from Belfast. They're called Chalk. If Kev Graham hasn't listened to them, Kev, I'm telling you, live on air, listen to this band, because you'll definitely be into them. I think they've described themselves as Idols meets Bicep. I don't really know much about Bicep, but I've heard Idols and they're pretty good. But I've just been listening to them this morning before I came on air, and they're really, really good. Like, proper. It's got about 60 tickets left or something like that, which is not bad for a first stab in in Glasgow. I don't think they've played here before. So, but you'd probably be into them as well. But they're right up Kev's street. I mean, he'd be all about them.
He'll get his kneecap, balaclava on, and he'll come along. 60 tickets at Tots tonight. I think at last count 14 for Big Johan. And I'm looking forward to seeing everybody who comes along to that. So I've got to say, really enjoyed that once again, as always, JP. Thanks for coming on and chatting about Celtic and music and everything else that came our way. Thanks, everybody, for getting involved in the comments. Nice and positive today. Let's keep it that way. And I'll see you tomorrow at 12:30 on A Celtic State of Mind.
Cheers.